Welcome back to our discussion on economic reforms adopted by India in 1991. Earlier, we have learned about the first process of economic reforms, that is, through liberalization, the freedom was given to Indian industries. They were freed from the control and restrictions of government policies in industrial sector, in financial sector, in tax reforms, in external trade, the foreign exchange reserves, in trade and investment sectors. But today we'll learn about the second part of economic reforms, that is on privatization. We'll learn about the meaning and the methods, the ways about the government can use to bring about privatization, and we'll learn about the concept of disinvestment and why it's important. So first, what's the meaning of privatization? Privatization implies shedding of ownership or management of a government-owned enterprise. So the government-owned enterprise, the government-owned industries, given way to others, especially the private sector, to own and manage their earlier erstwhile industry. So the government companies here are converted a private private companies. That's about privatization. All these government-owned industries converted into private sector. How to go about that? There are two ways. One, by withdrawal of government from ownership and management of public sector companies. Withdrawal of control, withdrawal of day-to-day affairs, given way to private sector to own. That means they sell the stake, sell the share for private sector to claim majority and run the business. And by doing so, the government can give way, get out of that company, that field of production. Secondly, it can also privatized by outright sale of public sector companies. So the companies can be sold out to whoever has the bid on the auction on that industry, government-owned industry. So either of these two ways, public sector units or government-owned units can become private. That means like private companies can buy these public sector public sector units. Okay, now we'll learn about important concept of um, disinvestment. What is disinvestment? Privatization of the public sector enterprises by selling off part of the equity of PSEs, public sector enterprises, to the public is known as disinvestment. In this case, the government-owned industries sell selling off part, you understand, sell a certain percentage of its holding to the public. So the public can buy, it can be investors through shares, so that by doing so, the government may still have the majority ownership, can still run and manage the industries, but it can infuse more capital from the market, so that when it gets that capital that it sells apart, it can utilize in other developmental um, programs. Okay, so there are many public sector units that have been sold by the government through disinvestment. It has a target in every year how much to sell stake. It has sold stake in the most well-known company like Maruti Udyog, the one producing Maruti cars. There, it has sold stake to private sector to I mean public in the stock markets in this so that they can co-own. Hindustan Zinc company unit producing zinc, Balco Bharat Aluminium Company Limited, and there are also talks to sell stake in Air India and many hotels so that the government gives more power um, to the more stake, more equity capital to the market, to the public to buy from the market so that they can co-own the company so that by doing so the government can infuse more capital into the economy. So let's see why this investment. It wants to sell parts of its industries, parts of its holding to the public, to the market, we can say. The purpose of the sale, according to the government, number one, to improve financial discipline because they get the capital from the market. New investors co-own the other new shareholders. There will be an improvement in financial position because they get fund from outside the system, and by doing so they get more fund from outside. They can facilitate number two, modernization. So these are the two important um, purposes of this investment: to get more financial discipline with the help of investors, and secondly more fun so that they can modernize technology upgradation, and thirdly there's a sense that private capital that you welcome and managerial capabilities by these private sector can improve the performance of the PSUs. Remember, through investment they are still PSUs. Okay, but it's the process to sell a part 10%, 15%, so that they co-own, they are the co-shareholders of the company, and by doing so, they improve the performance of these PSUs. So that's about the program of privatization that has been adopted by our country right from 1991, and still even today there is always a process of disinvestment on so many Indian owned government owned Indian companies, Indian industries. Okay, so that's about privatization, the ways, the methods to privatize, and also another way of doing it through disinvestment. Why disinvestment? And there's also a point to note that even though the government wants to go on with privatization, but still it has its own industry still running, and that's to improve the performance like we've seen through this investment. It has also um, give autonomy, more freedom, and more managerial decision, not by the council of ministers, not by the parliament, but the running of the industry has been given full freedom like it's been done in private sector. Private sector perform well, better than public sector. So seeing that case, they follow the model of private companies in the public sector. So there are many still public sectors that are owned by the government, but the way they manage, they run the day-to-day activities, the managerial decision are left with these PSUs. Okay, so you learn about these Maharatnas, Navratnas, and Mini Ratnas in box 3.1 to know the different categories of those public sector, big public sector units that are still with the government but on running on a private sector style. The style of functioning is like private companies. So that's about the second part of our discussion on um, economic reforms. So what you've learned about the mini privatization and how the government privatized public sector, and you've also learned about the disinvestment and the main purpose of this investment. And the next the final part will be on globalization.